right, and welcome everyone. What a pleasure it is to see you all here and also to see Chris with us today. Chris, we seem look a little bit similar, don't you think?
Yeah, I embraced the full baldness about like 4 or 5 months ago. I had hit the
I
point
see.
where I had been clipping it, and I looked like a tennis ball that had gotten run over by a lawnmower. It was just
I
really
see.
like patchy up top. So I went just full, and it's been
That's
awesome. I save a ton of money on
yeah.
haircuts. So
Well, that's for sure. It's like we probably shouldn't be going that direction, although I think that some of the attendees here might be sharing our passion here as well. Maybe not. That's okay, because today we're going to look into the fancy, wonderful world of JavaScript and things that we need to know about JavaScript and where we are heading in the world of JavaScript. I'm very happy to have with us here today wonderful friend Chris. Chris helps people learn JavaScript. That's it. That's what Chris does and has been doing for many, many years. He also has a wonderful free JavaScript course that is available for everybody to go ahead and learn and dive in. I know that you, Chris, love pirates, puppies, and Pixar movies. What a
that's true.
wonderful combination that is. You live near horse farms in rural Massachusetts. And also you run Go Make Things with Ryder, a fluffy rescue dog. How is your rescue dog going on? Like, how is
He's great. I wish he was in the room with me right now. My last dog, she was really old and she's just like sleep on my feet all day. This guy is a lot younger, and so he's usually like causing chaos downstairs while I work, which is
right? That's
not what
fair
we
enough.
wanted when we rescued him. But it's rescue dogs. You get what you get.
Yeah, you get what you get. You don't choose what you get, right? So
No,
that's where
no,
you
they're
are.
all wonderful, just unique.
Excellent, excellent. So Chris, and everyone who is joining us here today, of course, I want to just remind everyone this is a very informal meeting, so to say. So we're diving into all kind of topics, sharing things here and there, and this is your moment to ask any questions that you like to ask. I have some prepared, and I have some opinionated topics, I would say, because I think that when it comes to JavaScript, everybody has a particular opinion. So we'll probably dive into some of those, but I very much welcome you to bring up your questions as well in the chat, or if you want to speak on the microphone, please just raise your hand and we will respectfully pick you up and you can ask your question directly. Before we start though, and feel free to actually start writing questions if you're interested, everyone. Chris, why JavaScript? I mean, you could be doing so many different things in your life. You could be doing knitting. You could be writing books. You could, I mean,
Yeah,
you do write books actually, right? You could be doing so many different things.
yeah,
Why JavaScript? What is it about JavaScript that excites you, that keeps you going? Because you've been doing
yeah,
this now for a while.
yeah. Uh, so there's a few layers to this. When I started, I was actually a human resources professional, who was kind of just dabbling around with code because I had a blog and I wanted a little bit more control over how it looked. And There was this kind of this moment for me. I was working with my boss. We were trying to put together this it seems very very obvious now, but at the time training was all like you get people in a room for 8 hours and talk to them. We were like, what if training was more like YouTube where you could watch like short videos? So we had this like proof of concept thing we were trying to put together, and our IT department was like, it'll cost $100,000 and take a year and it probably won't be what you want. So we went to an agency and they're like, yeah, no, we can do it, it'll take like 2 months, but it'll cost $500,000. And we're like, well, that's not going to work. So my boss was like, he's like, you know a little code, could you build it? And I looked him dead in the eye and I said, no, definitely not. I do not have the skills to build this. And he asked the question that changed my career. He said, well, can you learn? So I spent like 2 weeks just deep in the bowels of Stack Overflow trying to figure out how to hack WordPress into some app platform. And I wrote the worst code I've ever written in my life, but I got some like really rough kind of things stood up that allowed us to at least demo this idea. And I was hooked. In that moment, I was like, I know I don't want to do HR anymore. I want to be a programmer because I love making things, but I suck at working with my hands. I have no talent in carpentry or construction or anything like that. And so for me, just code in general But JavaScript specifically allows me to take all these crazy ideas I have in my head and make them reality. And I'm now at the point where, like, anytime one of my family members has some sort of like thing they want and there's not an app to satisfy that need, I can just whip together a quick little web app and throw it up on like some shared hosting site I have, and now we have an app for that. And yeah, so for me, it's a really long-winded way of saying I really like being able to, as my website name implies, make things. And JavaScript has been really, really cool for that. You noted I've been doing this for a long time. I think I'm coming up on like a decade now. And at this point in my career, I find new technology a lot less exciting than I did when I started. And the thing that really keeps me going is the teaching aspect. I absolutely love when I work with students who are either very new to this, or they've tried to learn code a few times and they've struggled and they feel like they want to give up. And then they have this like moment where everything clicks and they get it and they start to get really excited and they start to build really cool stuff. I now find that way more exciting than building cool stuff myself. As much as I still love making things, I love seeing other people kind of come into their own as programmers. And that's the thing that really keeps me doing this day in and day out.
I think it's kind of similar to many people, right? Where you kind of get in and you start getting all excited. I think that it's still, in many ways, and please, dear friends who are joining us, agree, disagree with me as well. I have the strong feeling that there is a lot of excitement. And that's a good thing, right? A lot of excitement around CSS, a lot of excitement around JavaScript and what you can do, how you should be writing JavaScript and where JavaScript should be going and all of that. And I think it's incredible. But I think, again, probably when you dabbled a little bit around everything from jQuery to, or Dojo, I don't know what we all did in our past lives, to React or Angular or anything in between, at some point you just stop getting that excited about everything new that comes up. You just feel that maybe it's a good idea to have something that's predictable, stable, that you feel comfortable with every now and again, right? And it's interesting that you bring this up, Chris, because for me, there was this moment which really changed my view of how we see what we're doing, what we're building. And it was this article by Chris Coyier that was published, I think, 2020 or 19 or so. You might have seen this one, about the Great Divide, where the idea basically behind the article was, you have two front-end developers coming in and sitting at the bar, and they have nothing to talk about. Just nothing. Some of you, I'm wondering if anybody had a similar experience in the past as well. I'm going to drop in the link here in the chat so everybody can track and maybe actually open it up later too. Because the problem that started showing up over the last, I don't know how many years or so, is that you get two kinds of front-end developers, and they both are front-end developers, right? Where you get somebody who's very deep into the JavaScript side of things, and you go in and your frameworks and libraries and the ins and outs of JavaScript. And then you also get people who are maybe slightly more on the light side of things, I would say, with accessibility, with CSS, with a bit of JavaScript, maybe vanilla JavaScript, not necessarily going all in on React. I'm wondering, Chris, where do you find yourself at this point of your career?
Yeah. So I don't really mess around with tools like React at all. I've actually, in the last year or so, I've found myself going back to PHP a lot, more so than I did a few years ago. I think for me, it's not. So I'm of two minds. I kind of hate React and what it has done for the web, but I also understand that a lot of teams find it helpful, and so I don't want to take away from that. But it's ironic. I teach JavaScript, and a big part of what I teach is that we should use less of it and try to rely on other parts of the stack whenever we can. And a lot of that comes from a couple of different places. A big part of what I advocate for is putting users at the forefront rather than developers and kind of their experience. Not that developer ergonomics or developer experience isn't important, but a lot of times I think we choose that to the detriment of our users. So I prefer kind of technology that focuses users first and foremost. But the other thing about this is I think we've been fed this line that a lot of developer tools make life easier for the developer. And I think for a certain subset of developers, that is very much true. And I think for another very large group of developers, the opposite is true. A lot of the tooling creates speed bumps or gates that keep a lot of people out or slow down their ability to participate in things. So, you know, a lot of tools now, the first thing you have to do is open up terminal and npm install some stuff. And for a lot of developers, especially folks who are just learning, that is a huge barrier to entry that keeps people from getting involved or makes it a lot harder for them to participate. I compare that to the good old days of jQuery, where you would just drop a script element on a page with a link and you were off to the races. It feels a lot different today, for better and for worse.
Yeah.
You know, part of that is the web is also a lot more capable than it was a decade ago.
Sure,
So,
of course.
you know, yeah, I don't know. This is the kind of thing. There's a really nuanced conversation to be had here. I used to feel very strongly like framework's bad, and I think it's a lot more nuanced than that now. And I think there's also some tools that have tried to solve a lot of problems that earlier frameworks introduced, while also introducing some new ones of their own. So,
Yeah, I think
you know,
it's just really interesting to see and observe this enormous transition and movement, really, really hectic, I would say, back and forth and back and forth. When you look back and where we used to be with PHP and LAMP stack, we used to be on the server-side side, then we moved all the way into the client side, and we said, no, that's not good enough because of performance, so let's go back. And then we found path to Jamstack, and then from there we found paths to everything from progressive hydration and you know, isomorphic and so many different things, and just stumbled upon an article by Ken Dodds about all the different options that, or not the options, but the architectures that we could be using with a single page application and multi-page applications. And I don't want to kind of go necessarily in that route, kind of talk about that specifically, but more interesting question for me is, how do you navigate it? So if you have a project in front of you and you have some constraints, be it business constraints, legacy constraints, anything in between, I think that most of us sitting here in this call will, whether we want it or not, will have to deal with legacy code that includes at least a bit of jQuery here and there, right?
Yep.
And it's not going to go anywhere for a while, probably, although maybe it's kind of slowly disappearing still. But how do you make that call? What kind of architectural pattern do you go? At which point is it comfortable to go all vanilla JS? At which point do you need to start thinking about something a little bit more sophisticated in terms of community and framework and all that? What would you say at this point?
Yeah. So, and you know, part of the thing, this is one of the reasons why I feel frustrated by the fact that we tend to just reach for shiny new tool for every, not you and I specifically, Vitaly, but just as an industry, there's this tendency to just kind of chase these new tools. Is once you commit to a tool, you're kind of locked in for a while, because the switching cost is really high. Even if you have like a legacy project with jQuery in it, I would argue today that jQuery's big boon to the web is two things. It has really great documentation, which makes it very easy for new developers to just jump right into. And it paved the cow paths for a lot of browser native technology that we have today. The reason why things like Query Selector and Query Selector All and the class list API exist is because jQuery showed an API that was better than what we were doing before.
In some way, jQuery kind of became the web, right? It's kind of really shaped
so the platform absorbed the best parts of jQuery. There is almost, no, I'm gonna be even more extreme. There is nothing that jQuery does today that I couldn't write just as easily in vanilla JavaScript. The bigger challenge, I think, is when you have a large code base that's written in jQuery, converting that all into vanilla JavaScript is can be a significant cost. And I don't think it's always worth it to bear that cost. Where it becomes more nuanced for me is that in just a couple of years' time, tools like React and Vue are going to be that legacy code that people inherit and now have to make decisions about what to do with. And those tools have a significantly more burdensome cost on the end users who consume the things we build than jQuery did. Just in terms of kind of total JavaScript shipped and fragility of the end product that you consume. And that's just a nature of the fact that, you know, these tools are doing a lot more like total rendering of HTML than jQuery ever did. jQuery was more like, let's move stuff around that's already there.
Yeah, like the manipulations.
Whereas, you know, React and Vue were more like, we're going to render the entire UI. And so when things go wrong, they go wrong a lot more catastrophically. There's a substantial delay in being able to interact with the page because the entire page is the JavaScript. I'm not actually answering your question, and I'm sorry about that, Vitali.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, in terms of like kind of where I make that decision. Like if I'm starting greenfield today, I'm never grabbing jQuery. I'm usually going straight vanilla. Legacy projects, if they're not particularly JavaScript heavy, I will often just convert the jQuery over because it's not a lot of work for me. If there is a lot of code, and that's a very obviously kind of like abstract kind of like, you know, like where that line is very subjective. But if there's a lot of jQuery, I might not bother. The other conversation I've had with folks is if you're talking about like a WordPress project, a lot of WordPress plugins are just going to default load jQuery, you know, for various reasons. And so you can go through a lot of work removing it, and then it's just going to get loaded back anyways. I think the phrase I heard is you're already paying the jQuery tax, so you might as well just lean in and use it for all the other things. So yeah, it's like so many things programming. It depends, right?
Yeah. But it's interesting that it's 2023 now, and we're still talking, having quite a lot of conversations around jQuery. I think many of us actually are forgetting that the vast parts of the web are very much powered by jQuery still. So if you look around, you would find like I think that Web Almanac 2022 showed that it's at this point, it's like keeps repeating the same for years. 84% of websites are powered by jQuery today. So it's not like 2%. For comparison, React is approximately 7 to 8%, and Vue approximately, I think, 2 to 3%, if I'm not mistaken. Right. So very often, of course, we should not be comparing apples to oranges, because very often you would have both jQuery and React, or both jQuery and Vue sometimes kind of coexisting in the Frankenstein, I guess. But just something for us again to keep in mind here. But kind of building up on top of what you were saying, I'm wondering, where do you think we are now in this JavaScript world? I know that some people here on the call might be very much in favor of React, and I'm working on plenty of projects where React seems to be working really well for us, also in general performance, kind of really getting where we want to be. So it's really kind of a matter of what the team is capable of, the preferences, the stack, and all that. But I'm really curious about where we're actually moving, because when you look around, especially this year, there has been a big conversation around, I don't know how to call it, like a 0 kilobyte JavaScript movement, if you like, with tools like Astro showing up, tools like, I don't know,
Svelte,
Eleventy and SvelteKit and so on, and the others, where basically the idea is, well, use whatever technology you like. And this is what I really like about Astro. Use whatever technology you like. You can use web components, you can use you can use React, you can use Svelte, whatever you need. But basically with Astro, you can then basically render server-side have a server-side rendered pages that you just push on a site, and that's it. No JavaScript needed unless you need something for interaction. But that React application never leaves your building environment, which I think is actually pretty neat and cool. Do you think that this is kind of the future, or is it still going to be reserved for landing pages and websites that kind of can be pre-generated ahead of time?
No, I very much think tools like Astro and Svelte are the future. At least the midterm future. One thing I've struggled with is so I don't know if you remember when the platform started getting more capable and jQuery, you know, stuff that jQuery used to definitely need it for, suddenly like vanilla JavaScript could handle, but it couldn't do everything. And so there was this slew of tools that were designed to be like just lightweight DOM manipulation libraries. I think it was like Umbrella JS was one of them that came to mind. And they were around for like a year or two, and then they just completely lost to like state-based UI libraries like React and Vue and Angular. And so I don't know if tools like Astro and Svelte are the next umbrella JS or they're the next React and Vue. So what I mean by that is they feel very much like tools that are designed to band-aid over some of the mistakes or some of the downsides of libraries like React and Vue. They solve a lot of problems. I love the fact that they are server-side HTML first and then just sprinklings of JavaScript where you need it. But I also wonder if the web platform is going to absorb a lot of what those libraries do today, and some new kind of approach to things is going to emerge in the next 5 to 10 years that's going to make those tools redundant. And I don't know. I suspect that will not be the case, but I could very much be wrong. Like I think tools like Astro and Svelte have staying power. But it's all just kind of conjecture at this point.
Sure. But
yeah,
also,
I guess the other downside to these tools, or the thing that gives me pause, is a tool like Astro is really great for the end user, but I think also exacerbates the problem of these like Frankenstein code bases where you just throw all the things at them, and I think that is actually worse for developers and developer experience in the long run. I mean, the reality is we're doing this sort of thing now anyways. Just as because you mentioned, it's not uncommon for code bases to have 2 or more libraries being loaded in the front end anyways. So, if you can do that in a way that's better for the user, great. But I do think it just kind of papers over some of the underlying systemic issues that we have as an industry.
That's right. Dear friends, at this point, I'd like to bring up again the point that if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll bring you up in here as well. It's not just about me going through my never-ending questions about the meaning of JavaScript and CSS and the web, right? And also one thing to mention is that we're probably going to need another 20 minutes because then I have to drop off, unfortunately. But we still have 20 minutes to discuss a lot. So please drop in your questions in the chat. Maybe while we see maybe questions being dropped, you started talking about things being absorbed into the platform. And I cannot pass by without asking where we actually ended up in 2023 now. Now, if I look at some of the wonderful technologies that we have, I know that you've been working quite a bit on service workers. Yeah, everybody was excited in service workers for a while now. I'm wondering, are we at the point where every website is using service workers by default? I don't think so, right? But that's an interesting conversation to have. But a more general question would be, service workers, progressive web apps, web components are great alternative to all the modern libraries and then of course frameworks that we ended up with. Have they replaced our frameworks and our libraries? They have not. Why not?
So there's two. I think it's helpful to split the two out, just very briefly. So I think one of the worst things that happened to service workers is them getting lumped in with progressive web apps. They are a part of progressive web apps, which I think led a lot of people to believe that if you're not building a progressive web app, you don't really need or want a service worker. Service workers are great for literally every single website. Like I think every website should have a service worker. They do wonders for the resilience and stability and performance of your site. They can make it really easy to provide nice fallback experiences when internet connections fail intermittently. They are just an amazing boost to any website. And I have some resources on my site that I will link to you on how to do that. I have kind of like a primer series on that. If you guys go to gomakethings.com/smashing hour, I've put together a ton of links about all the stuff that Vitaly and I are talking about today. You can go check that out. I'll make sure the service worker series is in there. But the web components thing, web components are absolutely gaining popularity. I think what has hindered their growth has been a couple of things. First of all, I think everybody wanted them, myself included, to do something that they don't. The hope, I think, had been that they would be like a drop-in replacement for interactive state-based components like you might use in React or Vue. And they are not really the same thing. So they can do reactive kind of state-based updates, but under the hood, they're doing that. Like when you author a web component, you're using old school DOM manipulation to do that, unless you bolt a library like React or Vue or Preact or Solid into it. And then, at that point, what's the point of doing that versus just using those tools outright in the first place? They are really great at allowing developer teams to use UI components, more like HTML, so that they don't really have to mess around with JavaScript at all. So, set some attributes, set some default HTML, and you're off to the races. They're super great for design systems where you want to ensure kind of a consistent experience across the board while allowing customization. So they're absolutely fantastic for that. They are not the same as kind of a state-based UI library component, which is, I think, what a lot of people really wanted and hoped out of them. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is that styling them, especially if you use kind of the shadow DOM aspects of web components, is currently really, really hard. It means either kind of loading a bunch of performance hurting external style sheets over and over and over again, or like inside the component, or dropping a bunch of hard-coded inline styles, or using another kind of build tool like lit to kind of import stuff for you. There is a browser native way to do it, constructible style sheets, where you can actually import CSS the same way you would import a JavaScript file with ES modules, but it is not supported in all browsers yet. And once it is, it will make things a lot easier and better, because the styling aspect of web components currently just sucks. It's absolutely terrible, and I think that's hindered their growth a fair bit as well. But yeah, web components are cool for the thing that they were designed to do, which is not what I think people wanted them to do.
Here we go.
And just my own opinion. I know some folks will disagree with that, but for me, I think that's a big part of the web component story and why we haven't seen them like replace a lot of these other tools. Because I get asked a lot, like, are web components going to replace React? No, they're not, just because they're designed to do a very different thing.
Yeah, so difference. If I'm just curious at this point, is anybody using web components in production at this point? Please write a plus in the chat if you do, or minus if you don't. I kind of know what to expect, I think, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts and opinions on that.
Just for what it's worth, some big companies are using them. Like,
sure.
Salesforce, for example, has them
loaded
all over their site.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not that they're not used; they're just not. I don't think they were the big shift.
Or not quite the mainstream. I would say this kind of hadn't really happened, right? So that's
I would describe them as one part of kind of a stack, rather than like, these are the thing we use to build all the things now.
Okay.
I am noticing no one in the chat is using
no one in the chat is using web components. Yes. So I'm wondering, because at this point, so maybe kind of moving back to the good old-fashioned JavaScript, what keeps you excited? Like, is there anything else? Not anything else. Is there anything that really they think like, wow, this is a great innovation, or I wish it existed at some point, or anything that's really that you think like, oh, everybody should know this about JavaScript today, about what you can do today? What can you call out, I don't know, 4 or 5 things that really excite you at this point?
Yeah. Oh, those are great. So a few different things. I am really excited for, it's not coming out for a while, but the temporal API, which is going to make working with dates and times a lot easier than it currently is, because that is currently terrible. So I'm excited for that. A thing that I really wish existed but doesn't is some sort of diff method that worked with the same simplicity as inner HTML, but did selective UI updating instead of completely destroying the UI. So like right now with vanilla JavaScript, I could technically do state-based UI by saying, here's an HTML string, render it into the UI, but it wipes out every element that exists. And I really wish there was some sort of native thing that I said, here's an element, here's what I want it to look like. Make it so with as few UI changes as possible. So you're not completely replacing existing elements if they're going to be, in the new string as well and that sort of thing. So basically like a native way to do like what React does under the hood. That would be wonderful. That would solve I think a lot of pain points. Other thing I'm really excited about is that the dialogue element finally works in an accessible way and does all the things it was supposed to do like 5 or 6 years ago that it didn't.
Well, I had no idea because I think a year ago, 2 years ago, we had a big conversation about dialogue being inaccessible. So it was a bigger update that came out last year.
Yeah, so there was finally a bunch of fixes that got pushed across all browsers now. It captures focus appropriately. It has a kind of a stylable overlay. It has 2 different methods for opening it. One with that overlay, so it works the way like a proper modal should, and another doesn't. And there's also if you have like a form inside your modal, you can capture user data and then use it to close the modal the same way you used to with like say like a confirm prompt or or something like that. But you can actually style it and do all sorts of wonderful things with it. So yeah, dialogue is really cool. And then honestly, as much as I was just kind of hammering on, I'm not sure if tools like Astro and Svelte are the next big thing or just kind of a band-aid. I'm really excited to see what tools like Astro and Svelte evolve into. I really love the idea of server first tools that allow developers to author the way they're most comfortable with while still providing a great end user experience, especially if they can kind of do like single page appy like experiences on the front end while providing server fallbacks. I think that's a wonderful thing, and not in the way that Next does it, where you're still shipping the entirety of React, even though you're generating the HTML on the server. From what I've seen, both Astro and Svelte ship way less JavaScript than you put into them, and that's a great thing.
Yeah, that's kind of the point. I mean, the main difference, from what I understand, is if we look at Next.js, which is of course a React-based framework, you basically can server render whatever you want, but then you still get your application, right? So you still have it, and you still probably have to put it. Although there is a lot of stuff you can actually put on the server components in React concurrent mode, but that's a separate story. And now with Astro, for example, what you can do is really strip away all the JavaScript and just use it as a tool, like you use any other tool in your build process. So basically just to speed out the pages that you actually need and serve as little JavaScript as needed. Not serving the entire framework, which I think is a big difference, of course. We should be expecting Next.js to evolve probably in a similar direction too. But yeah, we will see how this is going to change over time. There was a note by Bruce saying the dialogue is definitely much, much better, but it still has a few minor issues that developers will need to take into account to be really accessible.
Yeah. Scott O'Hara, I'm gonna drop a link to he has an article on the dialogue element that I think is going to be relevant and useful to this group. So I will drop this in. So he wrote an article. It's called "Use the Dialogue Element Reasonably." He points out a few of the kind of minor issues and kind of things to be aware of. But yeah, I will. He's much better able to talk to this than I am. So here, I'm going to drop this in the chat right now.
Perfect.
But yeah,
thanks, Chris.
That's a useful reference. And Bruce, thanks for flagging that.
Yeah, and another question that came from Eric: using an app where sandboxed iframes are being used, is it possible to set service workers or components with the same type of security as sandboxed iframes?
Service workers or components with the same type of security as sandboxed iframes. I'm not sure what kind of specific security. If you could say more about what you're hoping to or what you currently accomplished with the sandboxed iframes that you'd like to replicate in service workers. So just on the comment of with service workers, they are because they are effectively doing a man-in-the-middle attack on your own website, but like in a good way. They have a bunch of kind of baked-in security features. Most notably, they only work for same domain requests. So if you're you can't host them on another site and then have them intercept requests on your current site. They require an SSL certificate, because you are intercepting requests. That information all has to be encrypted, so you can't, like snipe passwords and then send them somewhere else, that sort of thing. Web components handle, they're not really necessarily designed with like security concerns in mind as much as scoping. And so the idea there is, if you render a web component and you have a bunch of HTML that you render with Shadow DOM, you isolate that from the main scope, and so it won't just automatically inherit global styles and things like that. And you can even lock it down so that you can't interact with it with global JavaScript if that's something you want to do. But a lot of this is contextual, depending on kind of, I guess, what your end goals are with sandboxed iframe. So if you're literally just doing it to prevent style interactions, you can handle that with web components today. If there's some kind of specific security thing you're trying to achieve, I'd probably need to know more before I could answer that appropriately.
Yeah, I think what you can also look into when it comes to iframes. Right. Yeah. So, okay, there's a question about service workers, not iframes. There was a question update, being able to allow third-party developers to write scripts, but without giving them access to the browser root.
Oh, let's see, let me give that just a moment of thought. Without giving them access to the browser root. Yeah, this is really funny. I know with web components, you can't access them from the root, but they can access the root from within. And yeah, service workers probably not going to solve what you want there either. I don't have a great answer for you, Eric. This is one of those things we're talking about in an abstract, is potentially a little difficult. I know there is a tool whose name is failing me right now that for performance reasons will load third-party scripts
in a web worker.
in a web worker.
Yeah, it's Partytown.
Yes,
it's actually
thank
pretty
you.
cool.
I haven't thought about that in like a year, but
yeah, Partytown is pretty amazing.
I don't necessarily think that's the same thing that you're talking about, Eric.
Yeah, probably not. So I'm going to
Yeah,
drop in a link here as well.
I don't know, I guess is the short answer. I'm really sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. But again, maybe that's something that Eric, you could maybe drop in as a message, and we can try to figure out if we can find a solution to that in Slack, or maybe also ping Chris directly. I don't know if Chris accepts emails. And another thing I also want to ask here, now that we have a few, like 5 minutes or so left, talking again about where we are and what the state of things is. One thing I actually wanted to ask is, how do you actually, now that I had the question, it kind of escaped me, of course. This is always happening to me. That's very confusing, very strange. Right. I remember now. So one thing I wanted to ask is, looking back and looking kind of forward again, we never had better browsers than today. Browsers are incredible. We don't have to work with and deal with browsing consistencies. We even have interop, like where we actually browsers get together and decide, okay, we're going to do it the right way for this year, and this is how we're going to track it. That's unbelievable. Like just the thing that this exists is absolutely incredible. We also have incredible runtime engines when it comes to JavaScript. We have incredible stuff at CSS. We have incredible stuff around performance. It seems like every year we're getting more and more fine control about how things are loaded, what should be loaded, what should not be loaded. And then also on the side of even, you know, when we look into frameworks, we get all the way into performance landscape, like moving as much stuff as needed to the server, so it doesn't have to be on the client, and then leaving a little bit on the client, what needs to be there. It seems to be great. Why is it then, Chris, tell me, why is it that then the output of our work, the outcome of our work on end users experience is actually slowly getting better in terms of performance? It does get a bit better, right? When we look at the core web vitals, it seems like we're making some progress, but the majority of the time and most applications, absolutely inaccessible, very difficult to use, experience not great, performance not fantastic either, and on top of that, also really hard to maintain and very difficult to kind of make work with all the wonderful technologies that we're using. So what went wrong, Chris?
JavaScript is what went wrong with it.
Is it? But isn't JavaScript like on its own? JavaScript doesn't have a soul. It's
No.
just a technology, right? So it's
Yeah.
not JavaScript's fault for sure, is it?
Well, so kind of, sort of. So it's so JavaScript is, just by the nature of it being a scripting language, and with things like HTML and CSS, you say, here's what I want to happen, and the browser figures out what to do. And if it can't figure it out, it just kind of moves on. With JavaScript, you say, here's what I want you to do, rather than here's the outcome I want. And if you mess it up, things go wrong. And so as a result, it is very, very unforgiving. And as a scripting language, it it also is significantly more expensive to load. Like if you have 20 kilobytes of CSS and 20 kilobytes of JavaScript, that JavaScript is substantially more expensive and impactful on performance, just by virtue of how the browser loads it. It has to, like, let's say 40, 50 kilobytes, that's more than one HTTP request. So the browser has to wait for the whole thing to come in, and then it puts it all together into one file, runs through the whole thing once just to see what's in there and pull any variables and function names up to the top. And then it runs through again and actually executes it. And while it's doing this, it stops anything else from rendering, because JavaScript has a tendency to move things around on the page. So it doesn't want to paint stuff that it's just going to have to move around or remove later anyways. And so, if you have JavaScript on your site, it tends to slow the whole thing down. And we're in a place right now where we are using JavaScript for all of the things, even rendering the entirety of the HTML. And so that means when a web page loads, the user gets nothing to start, instead of where historically they would get some basic HTML and then it would maybe get modified a little bit. So that's a big part of it. The other thing is that a lot of there was this push for a really long time towards single page apps, and Rich Harris, who built Svelte, actually had a talk the other day about how single page apps are good, actually, that I literally just wrote about yesterday. And it was very good, but one of the things he never really touched on is the fact that these tools have a huge accessibility implication that a lot of developers ignore. So when someone navigates from one view to another in a single page app and you update it, it's really important to announce to screen readers that the UI has changed and shift focus back up to the top of the page. And most of the tools that we do today do not account for that out of the box. It's a thing that a developer has to just kind of do on their own. With a multi-page app, where pages hard reload, that just happens automatically. The browser just gives that to you for free. And so I'm talking about a very specific example here, but this is the big underlying problem with most of how we build today, is that we're using a lot of tools that do a lot of really cool things, but they don't have that accessibility or performance consideration baked in. And to be fair, a lot of developers are working on really great internet connections and really expensive new computers. And that is not necessarily true of the general user population. I know that's also not true of all web developers. there are plenty of web developers in developing areas or working on old machines, but a lot of the folks who are, I'll call them the tastemakers, they're working on really high-end stuff with great, super expensive equipment, and they don't feel the impact of the tools that they build and the tools that they recommend the way that the average user might. I will stop with my soapbox now and allow you to react. But I think that's a big part of the problem.
Yeah, I think I would love to see the big frameworks, the biggest frameworks out there. And I think that there has been a Project Aurora at this point, where by Google, where they actually pushed a lot in making sure that Angular and Next.js and all the frameworks actually are faster by default. But I would really love to see the same going for accessibility, where some of the decisions just easier to make right out of the box without even thinking about it. It just probably, hopefully, just a matter of time until we get there. But who knows? Who knows? Well, the time is circling in at this point. So maybe before we go here, Chris, one final word of wisdom from your end. Would you say that we are looking at the bright future, or are we doomed and gloomed forever?
No,
and the JavaScript loop like an event loop.
The thing to remember with the web is it always moves in phases. So you talked about this earlier, but kind of the shift from mostly in the client to mostly on the back end to mostly in the client, it happens over and over again. So we're in a current phase where we're shifting back to do more on the server. And yeah, we are doomed, I think. As it doomed, we're going to repeat this cycle over and over again. I think there's a bunch of cool new stuff coming out that some of it will be great, some of it will be terrible, and it will always be interesting.
But we'll be there monitoring and observing and commenting on that, thinking and pondering about the meaning of life and the meaning of JavaScript in the wonderful World Wide Web of ours. Well, with this in mind, thank you so much, Chris, for being with us. Thank you, everyone, for joining in as well. I think so. Everyone who is going to watch it a bit later as well. I hope that you dove it a little bit. I would say it. You tapped a little bit into this wonderful world of JavaScript, whether you like it or not. It's actually very important for everyone to understand what's going on in this industry. So with this in mind, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We're looking forward to the next Smashing Hours, so please stay updated with the Smashing newsletter and all. And again, Chris, thank you so much for coming, and see you, everyone, next time.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye, everyone.